The Titanic was gone. In its place was an ocean of darkness, and hundreds of survivors drifting in lifeboats, with one terrifying question hanging over them. How long until someone comes? There was no city on the horizon, no coastline, no approaching ship, just freezing water, endless darkness, and the faint voices of people trying to comprehend what they had just survived. They had escaped the Titanic. They were alive, but that did not mean they were safe. The ocean was still brutally cold, and rescue was somewhere beyond the darkness. The lifeboats were scattered across the Atlantic. Some survivors could barely see another boat. Others heard voices somewhere in the darkness, without knowing how far away they were. And behind them was something almost impossible to comprehend. An empty patch of ocean where the largest ship many of them had ever known had stood. Only hours before, so they listened. Every distant sound might have been another boat. Every faint light might have been rescue. But most of the time, there was only the sound of the ocean, and slowly, the cold became another enemy. Every minute in the North Atlantic was draining strength from people who had already survived the unthinkable. But perhaps the cruelest part was not knowing. They could not see the future. They could only wait and wonder if anyone had heard the Titanic's final calls. Captain Arthur Rostron had ordered the Carpathia toward the distress position, knowing that ice could be waiting between his ship and the people fighting to stay alive. But the survivors knew none of this. To them, time had almost stopped. There was only the cold, the silence, and the terrible question of whether rescue would come. Then a light appeared somewhere in the darkness. For one brief moment, hope spread through the boat. But when you are desperate enough, even hope can deceive you. They waited. The light remained distant, then disappeared behind the darkness. The night was still not finished with them. And then there were the men in an even more desperate position. Nearly 30 people crowded onto an overturned, collapsible boat with nowhere else to go. There was almost nowhere to rest. They had to balance on the curved hull, shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by freezing water with nothing but darkness in every direction. Second Officer Charles Lightoller was among them. He would later recall that roughly 30 men were crowded onto that overturned boat, waiting through the night, but the cold was taking its toll. Lightoller later testified that several men died during the night, apparently from exposure, while the others struggled to hold on. Imagine knowing rescue might be coming, but having no idea whether it would arrive in time. For the men on that overturned boat, every minute mattered. Then, after hours of darkness, something finally began to change. The horizon was no longer completely black. Dawn was coming. For the first time in hours, they could see the ocean around them. And in that pale morning light, the survivors could finally see just how completely alone they had been. And then, something appeared on the horizon. At first, it was only a tiny shape, but to the survivors, it meant something they had almost stopped believing in. Rescue. It was the Carpathia. After racing through the night, the rescue ship had finally reached the lifeboats. For those survivors, the nightmare was beginning to end. At about 4:10 in the morning, the first lifeboat was picked up. One by one, the survivors were finally being pulled away from the ocean and toward safety. Across the lifeboats, husbands, wives, parents, and children could finally see familiar faces again. Some had spent the entire night believing they might never see them again. One by one, the lifeboats moved toward the Carpathia oars cut through the water as exhausted survivors made the final journey, away from the place where their world had disappeared. And then, it was quiet again. The lifeboats were empty. The survivors were aboard. And that's where Journey ends. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next adventure.